San Francisco Giants, yep, I'm a baseball fan. Matter of fact, I'm so old. How old is he? When I was a boy, my dad took me to a game at the Candlestick Park in San Francisco, and I actually saw both Willie Mays and Willie McCovey in the same field playing together. Long time ago. Anyway, today's video is about a pistache tree that I worked on. And I know I talk about pistache trees an awful lot. That's because that's a tree that we have planted here in abundance, but it's also a tree that has a lot of problems. And I recognize that this weakness, these weaknesses in the branches breaking, means that you have to make tree decisions that are related to that particular type of tree. And that's so important to understand the different variables on each of the species that you work on. You know, a live oak is different than a valley oak. An ash tree is different than a maple tree. And every maple tree is different. Every ash tree is different. Every single species that you work on or cultivar within the species has different characteristics. Some trees are strong. Some trees are weak. Some trees have too much fruit. Some trees are cultivars that were developed that have abnormalities because they're a cultivar. The Bradford pear is a perfect example. You know, one of the aspects of what we do here in arboriculture, tree trimming, tree pruning, is what I like to refer to as tree decisions. And you'll find a number of my videos with that as a lead in the title. But here's a good example. As the guy responsible to make wise decisions for this tree, there's a lot of things I have to recognize. One, I have to know the species of tree. I have to know its strengths and weaknesses. I also have to know the different characteristics that make this tree potentially a problem. Now, this is a Chinese pistache, Pistachia chinensis, and I talk about this tree quite a bit because this is one of the species that we have a lot of failures with. So my decision here is based upon my knowledge that this is a weakness. And this happened about 10 years ago. Big limbs split off, but there's a lot of decay that's starting to develop up in through here, and eventually this is going to become very, very weak. This crotch right here and the potential for it to split down is very real. A lot of it has to do with the amount of weight that's out on this particular branch. And there's a lot, there's an awful lot out there. So I don't want to take too much off, otherwise I'll imbalance the tree, but I need to get enough off of this side, and this side to make this thing safer. If I don't do it and the whole thing splits out, then it pretty much ruins the whole tree. She loves this tree. She's lived here for almost 50 years, and they planted this tree. It's about, it's kind of hard to tell with the GoPro camera because it's reduced vision on here, but that's about 18, maybe 20 inches across. But it's got a big, beautiful, wide spreading canopy that they absolutely love. Some of this stuff is hanging over the roof. They don't mind it so much, but one of the huge problems are these little things, the berries on this tree. At this point, they're very immature and they're not too heavy, but by August, this tree just becomes laden with these red berries that are very, very heavy, and these trees will just sag. So I think my decisions on this are going to be based upon a balance of cuts up here. I've got my little bucket here so I can get up here. I'm going to get a little bit off of here. I'm going to get something significant off of there and something moderately significant over on that side. If I just do one side and it's heavier on the other side, then the wind blows, it's going to have a tendency to rock and twist. So I've got to kind of do a balancing act of the whole thing. And it's based upon the width of what's going on with this particular limb. So what we got going on is this one limb is branching off into 3 sections, and each of these sections is very wide, and it's laden with these darn berries. So let's get up here and see what we can do. I'm going to try something a little bit different today. On this video, I took my GoPro and I attached it to my helmet. And a lot of people do that. I don't do that very often. So you're going to kind of get a bird's eye, climber's eye view of what it's like to do the pruning. I'll try to explain what I'm doing as I go. You know, a lot of people are asking for how-to videos, how to prune, how to make your cuts. I'll do the best I can of explaining things as I go, but you know, this is going to be a little bit longer, drawn-out video because I think some people are going to want to watch what I'm doing. I've got my electric saw, and I do use my saw one-handed quite often. A lot of people are going to frown on that, but that's an argument that I've heard for years and years, and I'm going to stand by the fact that I am very strong. I can handle a saw one-handed without any problems of it sagging down. I understand the potential. I am very cautious with it, so I can't recommend that you do it. I don't know how strong you are. I don't know how capable you are. But if you're a climber that does understand, you'll say, I understand what you're talking about. So I'm going to show it regardless, and you'll see how I work. I also use my hand pruners quite a bit and my hand saw. This particular job, I think it took me about an hour, maybe an hour and a half to do the entire tree, and I was probably 20 minutes on this side with the bucket. I had to make a lot of decisions, and many of the branches I was cutting, I was taking lots and lots of little pieces, working my way up to it. I didn't want to take any great big crashing cuts because it would just get caught up in the tree. And by hanging on to the pieces, I'm able to cut and move them as I go. So I'm managing it. That piece was small enough, didn't rip. There's Jorge going in the backyard doing some work with the gasoline-powered hedge trimmer. This was a general yard shape-up job, working on time. So we were just going from tree to tree to tree, including the shrubs. So we did an awful lot of work in this yard in one day. It's very important not to make flush cuts as you go. So if you see all my cuts here, I'm cutting them back to the branch bark collar. In some cases you'll see where I'll make a cut that you say, well, that looks like a flush cut, but it's just the first part of removing the whole limb. If I know I'm going to cut it back further, then it doesn't matter what the cut looks like. Sometimes I'll just cut a bunch of stuff to clear it out of my face so I can get in there and work, and then clean up the stubs later. This is interesting. I use my Felco hand pruners all the time, and I managed to hold on to a number of different pieces of dead wood. I just cut, and then throw 5 or 6 pieces off to the side so stuff doesn't get hung up in the tree. There was a cut that needed to go just a little bit closer. That one, I'm cleaning up the stub. You know, let's see, I did grab hold of that one, didn't look like it. Don't want to let anything fall on the roof. In many cases, it's just about keeping things in order. You know, I've seen guys get up in trees and they just cut, and let everything fall wherever it goes. And then the ground worker has a hell of a time shagging all the hangers out of the tree, you know, working your way around. And then invariably at the end of the day, something gets left up there, and I get called back in a few weeks because there's a dead piece still stuck up in the tree that they didn't get out. So part of the processing means making sure that you don't leave anything stuck up in the tree. And I see that so often. On the same job, I went in the back and I thought there was a row of junipers, and I thought they were dying. And I went over there and pulled a piece of dead wood, and it was just a dead hanger that the gardeners had left there. And there was about a dozen of them. So I made the whole top of this juniper hedge look like it was dying, and I just went along and picked up all the stuff that somebody else just left laying there. Lazy. I'm pretty efficient with my handsaw. I like the ARS straight blade. I'll use a curved blade, but I prefer the straight blade.
A lot of you guys, you get used to using a curved blade, and there's nothing wrong with that. The reason I like the straight blade over the curved blade is when you're making very gentle, smooth cuts, the curvature of the blade grabs on the curved part at the very end, where the straight blade is one long straight pull, and you're able to utilize all of the teeth of the blade. So up to about an inch and a half, in most cases I can just get it with 1 or 2 strokes of the saw. Also very important to recognize that a handsaw is not a machete. Send this to your guys. Let them listen to this. Do not bang your saw like a machete. You bend a tooth, every time you cut with it, those bent teeth will drag in the cut. If you need to use your saw like a machete, use the back of the saw, and you can do that. It's a habit you have to make. You can swing the saw and bang stuff out of the tree just fine, but if you use the side with the teeth, you're going to mess it up and you're going to shorten the life of that blade. These are ARS saws that I use, brand new. They're about $40. The blades are about $25, and they're a 5-minute replacement. Use just a couple of screws and you can keep the handle. That's fine. Here I'm up in the air and I'm sort of rotating around, kind of getting a better view of what's going on here. I don't know if you enjoy this work video or not. Makes you feel like you're out in the field. This is kind of interesting. This gives you a better overall vantage point of what the area looks like. Most of the homes in this particular neighborhood are all about 50 years old. So you end up with trees that are all 50 years old. And this particular client bought the house brand new. So every tree on this property they planted. So this pistache is 50 years old. The big conifers, those are all 50 years old. And there's a Japanese maple in the backyard that I'm going to show later that is enormous, and it's also 50 years old. I did a bit of work over the roof, and I was dropping this stuff on the roof because that was the most convenient spot. So I put the first piece down as a buffer, and then I started throwing all the brush on top of that piece of wood, so it wasn't banging the roof every time. It wouldn't have damaged it, but the people in the house would have heard it, and that just doesn't sound too professional. Any chunks of wood, I was throwing them off the roof, but the brushy stuff, it wasn't hurting anything. A lot of these times I make a couple of cuts just so nothing will rip, especially if they're a little bit heavy. Trying to make the cleanest cuts I can. Preserve the branch collar. Don't make any flush cuts. Make clean cuts. Don't slip with your chainsaw. I see that so often. This cut right here, I went most of the way through and then broke it off. So it was like 90%, but it was just about a 2-foot stub, so there wasn't any weight on it. If I went that far and it was a full branch, it would have ripped and torn. That one was sticking out just a little too far. That's what it looks like. I got down and checked it out for a while. There was a few cuts I had to go back up to. I'll show you that in a little bit. This is how much I took off of just this one side, as well as what you'll see on the roof. So these are all the weight reduction cuts, and there's still enough foliage up there so it doesn't have a huge hole. It is more sparse on that side, but I really didn't have any options. You can see that that area of decay and the old rip. That was definitely a weakness. So if I didn't do all this, the future of this tree being a balanced tree would have been shortened. So I did have to get back up there in the bucket for a few more cuts. I looked at it from the ground and decided that it wasn't quite done. My big fear is the berries on this pistache in the summertime. When they all turn red, they can be very, very heavy. And I've seen a lot of pistache, Chinese pistache, break directly because of the excessive amount of the berry production on there. They're actually seed pods. They're not really berries, but they look like berries. I guess you would call them little tiny baby pistache that are not edible. So this is a Chinese pistache. So it's not a pistachio that you can eat, but it's in the same family. foliage looks the same. It's just a non-edible version. I think the birds eat them, though. I've seen birds up there working on them. I'm pretty efficient with a handsaw. Some days I'm just using the handsaw all day long. And because I have that long, straight, smooth blade that doesn't catch on it, it's a very easy, swift pull, but it's not I'm not forcing it through the cut. I'm letting the saw do all the work. And you can see it's, in most cases, it's just a quick, easy, fast move. A lot of people ask me, how long do I get between changing the blades out? And the answer is, I go until the blade is dull. Unfortunately, as you're using the saw blade, you slowly forget what a brand new blade is like. And as it gets more and more and more dull, until one day you just realize, yeah, okay, it's dull, and you change it out, and it's like, wow, a new blade is so nice. It's so nice. Keep your blade clean. It's also a good idea to wax your blade. That makes it run smoother, but it also prevents the pitch and the sap and the sticky stuff from adhering to the blade. If it gets too bad, then the thickness of the blade becomes thicker with the buildup on it, and you kind of lose the value of the set on the teeth. See, each tooth is set a little bit wider than the thickness of the steel, and that's why it pulls through, and then you leave a kerf. So it's just the blades cutting with just a fraction of an inch of clearance on either side. But if you have gum buildup on the blade, then you're catching on the gummy stuff. So make a point of keeping it as clean as possible. And if you're working with trees that are susceptible to infections, it's not a bad idea to sterilize your blade from time to time. Lysol works pretty well. Sometimes I'll get into a tree that's so infected that we just keep the Lysol with it, and we're just constantly spraying our blades down, as well as our hand pruners and anything that could potentially spread the disease. So that's it. This was pretty much real time. I did do a few edit cuts where I jiggled the saw too much, but it's looking at about 12 minutes complete time here. So I think maybe total of about 20 minutes in the bucket on this side of the tree. The rest of it was pull pruner work and pull saw work, and I did get up inside and do some of the major dead wood, but that didn't take long. Good sharp Corona, not Corona, Felco. I like Felcro. Coronas are okay, but my favorite is the Felcos. And the Felcos will take a pretty sizable cut, but keep them sharp. There we are. That's what it looks like when it's all done. Not too bad. A little bit of a hole over on that side, but I was really thinking this one through, and I believe that if I didn't get enough weight off of this, then the complete and total failure on that limb would have been very, very real. So now we're getting over to that Japanese maple that I was talking about. Here's where a gardener screwed up. And you can tell he cut it with a chainsaw and gouged into it. It's a flush cut. It always bothers me to see cuts like that because, it was done so quickly they probably didn't even look at what they did. They don't realize that they made a mistake. This particular tree had a catch basin, and I wanted to dig it out to see just how bad it was in there. And yep, the water is not draining out, and all the leaves are turning into compost. I sometimes wonder if I could put this stuff in a pot and mix it with some dirt, if it would be real valuable. I'm sure it would. I always throw it away though. One day, maybe I'll save one pot and make it a pot for growing unique tomatoes or something. There, we're looking up into the tree. There was a considerable amount of dead wood in this tree. It did have a lot of verticillium wilt problems. We spent probably another 45 minutes just cutting out dead branches throughout the entirety of the tree. But I'm going to step back. I want to show you what this tree looks like. It's got a spread of about 40 feet or more. This is one of the largest Japanese maples I've seen in a long, long time. I know they get bigger than this, but this tree is 50 years old, And from a distance, it's beautiful. And they love it. They've got bird feeders and hummingbird feeders. And from inside their house, it's just a real showpiece. They also had a 50-year-old apple back here that they planted. Then, unfortunately, there was a considerable area of decay and it lost a big limb. I think this one limb breaking was what instigated the call in the first place. And while we were there, we said, let's just do your whole yard. I get that a lot. People call me in for one problem, and I say, as long as I'm here, let's just work by time, and we'll go through and do as much as we can, and trim up and take care of a lot of problems for you. And almost always, people are very appreciative of us just going around and finding what needs to be done. This tree was full of apples, but it was not a super abundant crop. And this time of year, you don't want to over prune it because it would open it up to sun scald, and summer isn't even here yet. That's what it looked like before I made the cuts. On the outside of the tree, I got the big pole pruner out. I've got a big head pole pruner that makes the larger cuts, and I went along the outside and made a whole bunch of cuts without completely butchering the outside of it, but I needed to get enough weight off of it so that if it did develop a heavy crop, all those decay pockets that you can see along the trunk wouldn't lead to further failures. I told them that in the fall, when it loses all of its leaves, we can get into a harder cut. And those are the cuts I made on the outside, so you can see I took a considerable amount of end weight off, and the tree looked presentable. I'm going to leave it at this point now, because this was a bird sanctuary, and at lunchtime it was very quiet. Sometimes I forget how peaceful it is until everybody stops working. All the neighboring gardeners stopped working, all the blowers stopped, everything happened at lunchtime, and all of a sudden it was just a sanctuary. Right behind this house is one of the last remaining orchards, probably one of the last orchards in this whole valley. At one time, the Santa Clara Valley was the Valley of Heart's Delight, and it just produced so much food.
So what are you going to do?
Here's my daughter, Callie.
I'm
I'm going to let it go at this point.
Hands
Thanks for
free.
watching.
And
And,
you going to slam into the wall?
I'm
please
gonna
subscribe,
slam my head
hit the
and
like
get a
button.
concussion.
Okay.
Hit that little bell so you get
That's my girl.
comments,
Here we
and
go.
be safe out there.
Oh my God, that's
Yeah,
so
right.
cool.
Be safe.
But you didn't come all the way back and slam your head into the
I
wall.
did not.
All right. This time, what are you going to do?
Get the tree. This time, I'm gonna stay on the tree.
You going to hit the tree and stick it?
Yeah. This one is too much.
All right. Go
This
for
one?
it. All right.
Okay.